In the past, the United States made a promise to newly freed slaves. They were promised 40 acres and a mule to start a new life, a promise that was never actually fulfilled. And so, Black Americans have spent generations fighting for their right to equal opportunities, access to education, and the chance to build wealth for themselves and their families. In 2020, the country was sent into chaos after the brutal death of George Floyd, an African-American man who died while in police custody. His death sparked nationwide riots and a movement for justice and equality, and the concept of reparations for Black Americans began picking up momentum. Now, the city of San Francisco is starting to take action. The Board of Supervisors has voiced support for the idea of reparations, but the question remains, how exactly should it be done? Should eligible Black Americans receive a $5 million lump sum payment, or should the city consider another strategy? San Francisco is not the only city tackling this dilemma. California, Boston, and other jurisdictions across the country are also grappling with how they should make amends for decades of discriminatory laws and practices that have systematically denied people access to land, education, and equal opportunity. It's a difficult issue full of complexities, but one thing remains clear: reparations are long overdue. The promise of 40 acres and a mule may never be fulfilled in our day and age, but we can work to build a more just and equitable society for future generations of Americans. And it starts with acknowledging and recognizing the past before making amends for the harm that has been done. In the 1940s, African Americans began migrating to San Francisco in large numbers so they could work in the shipyards. Despite facing predatory restrictive covenants and redlining, they worked hard and were able to create a thriving neighborhood in the Fillmore. But their success did not last very long. In the 1960s, government redevelopment plans forced African American homeowners to leave their homes. The U.S. took their property, demolished their businesses, and destroyed years' worth of hard work. The once prosperous neighborhood was destroyed, and citizens were left to start over once again. Today, Black people make up less than 6% of San Francisco's population, but account for over 40% of the city's homeless population. It's a grim reminder of the ongoing inequalities African Americans face in San Francisco and across the entire country. Thankfully, advocates like the San Francisco NAACP are fighting to make changes happen. They're calling for reparations that go beyond a simple $5 million payout. Instead, they're pushing for cultural resources, employment opportunities, housing, and healthcare to help make up for lost time and create a more just and equitable society for African American people in San Francisco. After all, simply giving people money does not change systematic inequality. Reverend Amos C. Brown, who serves on both the statewide and San Francisco reparations panels, is leading this charge. He knows firsthand the struggles that Black Americans face in this city and is determined to finally make a difference. The question of reparations for African Americans is controversial and deeply divisive. Critics say that neither California nor San Francisco supported slavery, and that no one alive today in those areas owns a slave or were one themselves. They argue that it's unfair for taxpayers, some of whom are immigrants, to bear the burden of structural racism and discriminatory public policies through their tax money. It's estimated that the most expensive ideas made for reparations made by the advisory committee would cost every non-Black family in the San Francisco area about $600,000 in taxes. Some of these recommendations include the $5 million per person payout, guaranteed income of at least $97,000 a year for 2 centuries, the elimination of personal debt, and the conversion of public housing into condos to sell for $1. These seemingly off-the-wall costs are causing many to push back against the idea of reparations. A 2022 Pew Research Center survey discovered that only 30% of Americans supported these ideas, while 68% opposed them. But almost 80% of Black respondents to the study favored their reparations, showing that the issue is one of deep importance to the community. Despite the rising opposition, a few Democrats Democrats are pushing for reparations to be paid. They argue that the legacy of slavery and discrimination has had a lasting impact on the Black community, and that it's time to make amends for historic wrongdoings. As the debate in San Francisco continues, the responsibility for deciding how to pay for reparations remains unclear. The advisory committee has recommended about 100 different options on how amends should be made, but it's not their job to determine how to actually fund it. That task falls on local lawmakers, and recently, 2 of them expressed interest in putting the issue to a vote. Matt Dorsey, a supervisor for San Francisco, has publicly expressed his support for a ballot initiative to include reparations in the city's charter as part of the next spending plan. Meanwhile, Shaman Walton, the supervisor driving the reparations initiative, is also in favor of the motion. The issue of reparations for Black Americans has been a continuous one for decades, with critics arguing that it is unfair for taxpayers to bear the burden of their ancestors' mistakes. But supporters believe it's necessary to make amends for past injustices and provide opportunities for African American citizens to build up wealth and prosperity for the upcoming generations. Before we continue, tell us what you think about the ideas the committee proposed. Let us know in the comments down below, and subscribe to You So Crazy if you want to see more informative videos just like this. Now back to the news. To make amends for years of institutional racism, the San Francisco Advisory Committee has put forth a set of recommendations for reparations. The proposals are aimed at addressing the systematic discrimination that has previously prevented Black people in the U.S. from accessing proper education, housing, and employment opportunities. The committee recommends establishing Afrocentric K-12 schools in San Francisco while hiring and retaining mostly African American instructors. They also suggest that teaching a mandatory core curriculum that covers their unique history and culture without washing over the past. To incentivize academic excellence, they have suggested that at-risk children who exceed academic standards should be paid. Their recommendations also ask for free mental health services, prenatal care, and rehabilitative services to be provided to underprivileged Black San Franciscans. The committee suggests finding ways to foster African American enterprises and giving these San Franciscans priority for employment openings and training. The proposals are part of a broader effort to atone for the city's past discriminatory policies and to empower the rich Black community. The recommendations have received support from many community leaders, but some critics argue that the cost of implementing them is too high. As the debate continues, San Francisco lawmakers are considering putting things to a vote. With the future up in the air, we will have to see how the city will address its history of racism and discrimination. This is an important decision that could have far-reaching effects on the lives of African American San Franciscans, and the Board of Supervisors were taking their time to consider each recommendation carefully. They were not required to come to a final agreement by any specific date, but they are committed to reviewing each recommendation thoroughly. The supervisors know that their decision would impact the future of many citizens and shape the city's history for years to come. The first state to establish a task team for reparations was California back in 2020. After working for over 2 years, they have still not been determined who should be eligible for payment and for how much. The task committee has until July 1st to deliver the final report with reparations recommendations, which will eventually be turned into legislation for politicians to take into consideration. The task committee has discussed the timelines and financial estimates for 5 grievous harms suffered by African American people in the past, including government property seizures, housing discrimination, homelessness, and mass imprisonment. Before this, the committee decided to limit financial reparations to those who were descended from African American people who were either enslaved or emancipated in the United States during the 1800s. But they rediscussed their ideas on how to repair the relationship with the African American community. They settled on $5 million per eligible person, The group has a list of requirements in mind, like being at least 18 years old and having identified as African American publicly and on record for at least 10 years, among others. There is so much debate and strong opinion surrounding the issue that it's difficult to see a solution that will satisfy everyone. Even so, something must be done to make up for the past. We'll have to wait and see what that something is as lawmakers and officials decide. Thank you for watching our video on San Francisco, one of the only cities actively looking to offer reparations for Black Americans. We hope you found this discussion informative and thought-provoking. San Francisco has taken an important step toward righting historic wrongs, and we hope their actions inspire other cities and governments to do the same. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload from You So Crazy. We'll be bringing you more content on all things social justice, politics, and culture, so be ready to stay tuned. And as always, feel free to share your thoughts on this topic in the comment section below. We love hearing from our viewers, especially on important issues just like this. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.